Welcome to Arc Fault Circuit Interrupter, or AFCI breakers. Who needs them? At the end of this lesson, you will be able to describe the purpose of AFCI breakers. You'll be able to explain the basic function of AFCI breakers. And then finally, you'll be able to identify techniques that home inspectors use to describe AFCI defects. So first things first, GFCIs sometimes are confused with AFCIs. A GFCI is a ground fault circuit interrupter. And today's focus is the arc fault circuit interrupter, which you saw in the video. So GFCIs are specifically designed to keep people safe from shock. Remember that. While AFCI's purposes are to protect dwellings from fire. So just remember, GFCIs are there to protect people. AFCIs are there primarily to protect the building. So this is certainly not to say that AFCIs don't protect people. We're really talking about what are the first order effects. So GFCIs, the first order effect is to protect the people. AFCI, the first order effect is to protect a dwelling. But if a dwelling is on fire, guess who is in that dwelling? That's right, people. So that would be a second order effect. So ultimately, it always comes down to personal safety in a home. While I like to say the roof is the single most important system in a home, the electrical system is the single most dangerous, if that makes sense. Here's the bottom line up front with AFCIs. These are scary statistics, but it's important that you know exactly where all home inspectors are coming from. There are approximately 51,000 home fires each year, and that's just in the United States. That's a lot of fires. The electrical distribution system in the home is the third leading cause of home structure fires. So that is all of your wiring and all of the things that can happen in your wiring. And it's not just in your wiring. If you remember from the videos, it's everything that you plug into your home's wiring as well. So those are all susceptible to shorts and creating challenges in your entire system as well. And sometimes people forget that. So we just look at the home and we think arc fault only applies to the wiring in the home, and that's just not true. That applies to everything inside the home and then everything you're going to plug into the home as well. And finally, each year in the United States, arc faults are responsible for starting more than 28,000 home fires. That is a lot of fires that are attributed directly to arc faults. It's now through this lens we can view the AFCI issue. So let's get started. So kind of an older panel may look like this, and it's really not older. We see a lot of older panels in older homes, but let's go back 30 years. The panel looked a lot like this, where today you'll see the panels look more like this. And these are those AFCI breakers. And that is where that protection starts, is actually in the panel. In fact, in many panels now, the GFCI protection is also available here in the panel. It starts here. These breakers are actually what they call dual. So here it's an arc fault dual, which also provides GFCI protection. So I know that can be confusing, but just know that a lot of today's electrical safety begins in the panel. So the panel is a critical piece to the entire safety of the home, or the overall safety of a home. Now the videos did a great job in describing what an arc fault is, so I'm not going to try to rehash that. But when you think of arc fault, just think of this picture here. It's stray voltage from one conductor to another at a very high temperature, and those do start fires in homes. When we look at the evolution of AFCIs, because the term AFCI has worked its way into our vocabulary in the real estate industry, in the mid-90s, they started looking for a solution to this arcing problem that was creating fires in homes. So by the late 90s, they had a solution, and it worked its way into the code, and then it was first implemented in 2002. And the requirement for AFCIs back then was only in bedrooms. And then that was expanded in 2008 to all living spaces. And also during this time frame, we saw some increases in technology where the breakers could detect the various types of arcing, because there is different types of arcing, if you remember from one of the videos you watched. And then finally in 2014, the AFCI protection was expanded essentially to all spaces in a home. So with very few exceptions, the home is now completely protected by AFCIs. And then in another lesson, we'll talk about the GFCI protection as well. So just know that newer homes are completely protected with AFCIs. So this is where it gets tricky. Now as the rubber meets the road as a home inspector and real estate professional, what do we say about AFCIs? Because I just told you in the previous slide that they were not required in all spaces in a home until 2014. Well, here are some interesting statistics for you. So 2014 is kind of in this group here. And this chart says that roughly 5% of all homes in the state of Washington were built after 2010. So that means that roughly 95% of all the homes we look at were built before 2010. And if we look at the first time AFCIs were introduced here, 2002, that leaves roughly 80% of all homes were built before any AFCI protection was available, and certainly not required because it didn't exist, right? So there's a little bit of a quandary for us. What do we do? What do we say about that? How might home inspectors see a lack of AFCI protection? How do we handle that? So as a real estate professional, you've probably seen several ways that this has been handled. For me as a home inspector, I really look at this as the seat belts of a home. So seat belts have been proven to work. Seat belts have been a rule, a law for quite a while now. What would we do with an older car that maybe didn't have seatbelts? Would it be a good idea to go back and install seatbelts because they're proven to work? And I think you see that's what happens a lot of times. But I kind of make this equation, seatbelts versus modern safety protections in a home. So as a real estate professional, you may have read a home inspection that read something like this. Speaking of the arc fault situation, no arc fault circuit interruption, AFCI protection present. These are required for safety. Recommend a licensed electrical contractor replace all existing breakers. So we have an older panel, built 1990, and as discussed, arc fault protection did not exist back then. So a phrase like, these are required, in my mind, that is not accurate because it's not required. It wasn't required when the house was built, and nobody can actually make you do anything to a home. How about recommending electrical contractor replace all existing breakers? You know, once again, this phrase taken as one observation and recommendation is problematic, and I think it mostly stems from just this use of the word required. So I'm sure you've seen these phrases, and that creates just a lot of discussion, a lot of question, a lot of consternation. So maybe another option, and this is the way I handle it, is in a 1990 home, there's the panel. You see the older style panel. We know it's 1990, and by your astute attention to this class, you know that in 1990, AFCIs were not required. Perhaps here's a better way to present this challenge. For me, as a home inspector, I make the observation that I don't see any AFCIs present. That's because they weren't required. Now, sometimes people do upgrade, but generally a lot of people don't know about it, so it doesn't happen. And then I make a comment that I didn't see any in the panel, and I do make a recommendation to consider upgrading in the future. And then I do provide a link for more information. And it really is all about the consumer making their own decisions on how to move forward with these findings in a home. So as we are reminded of these statistics put out by the Electrical Safety Foundation International, my hope is that you learned something in this lesson, and hopefully you understand the home inspector's perspective, but also learn a little something and be a little bit more equipped to help your client navigate the home inspection findings. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.